The night hummed with the sound of tires on wet asphalt as I sat in my car, parked across from the old brick complex on Alder Street. Rain streaked the windshield, blurring the world into moving watercolor. I shouldn't have been there, but something inside me needed proof. When Marcus said he was helping a friend move, I believed him. The way you believe the person who knows all your passwords, all your scars. Yet, when I saw her, Lena, step out of the elevator with him, laughing like they'd rehearsed it, my stomach dropped. They carried boxes, matching keychains swinging from their fingers. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, eyes hollow, lips trembling with a truth I refused to name. The building lights flickered gold against the storm. I watched as they entered apartment 4B, their apartment, and for a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. The world had tilted, and I was falling through it. When Marcus came home later that night, his hair still damp from the rain, he kissed my forehead as if nothing in the world had shifted. I pretended to sleep, inhaling the scent of someone else's perfume clinging to his jacket. The clock blinked 2:17 a.m., and the city outside was hushed, complicit. I listened to him shower, the sound of running water merging with my thoughts until I couldn't tell which was louder. My chest felt hollow, my breath shallow. He crawled into bed beside me, his arm heavy over my waist, a gesture once comforting, but now suffocating. I realized in that moment that betrayal doesn't begin with lies. It begins with silence, with the things left unsaid long enough to rot. Morning brought the illusion of normalcy. Coffee brewing, toast burning, the sound of emails pinging from his phone. Marcus hummed under his breath while buttoning his shirt, his reflection perfectly composed. I watched him tie his navy tie, the one I bought last Christmas, and wondered if she noticed how he preferred double Windsor knots when he said he'd be out late again. My voice barely cracked a reply. His phone buzzed, a text from LM. I didn't need to open it. Some truths arrive wordlessly. I smiled as he kissed my cheek, then turned away before he could see the fracture. By noon, I drove to Alder Street again, not for proof, but for closure. The sky had cleared, sunlight scattering across puddles. I parked 2 blocks away, my pulse quickening as I climbed the stairs. Apartment 4B's door stood open. Boxes half unpacked, the smell of new paint mingling with coffee. I stepped inside quietly, pretending I belonged. A framed photo already hung on the wall. Marcus and Lena smiling on a hiking trail. My throat burned. I touched the frame, tracing his familiar grin, and realized that everything I thought I knew about love had been carefully staged lighting on a dark set. When I finally left, I didn't look back. The street felt too bright, too honest. In my pocket, I carried the lease I had found in their kitchen drawer. Both signatures, neat and deliberate. The paper was still warm from my hand and somehow heavier than it should have been. As I walked away, wind lifted the corners, threatening to tear it apart, but I held on. Some things you need to keep, not as evidence but as reminder. Love isn't stolen all at once. It's rented piece by piece, until you realize the contract was never yours to sign. I couldn't stop thinking about the apartment. I couldn't stop thinking about them. A single question rattled around in my mind: how long had it been going on? It didn't make sense. Marcus, my husband of 5 years, wasn't the type to fall for someone else. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But the more I replayed the image of Lena stepping into the elevator with him, laughing and carrying boxes, the more I realized I didn't really know him at all. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, endless messages from friends who noticed my change in mood, and a constant loop of self-doubt. Had I seen what I thought I saw, maybe it wasn't what it seemed. But deep down, I knew better. A sick, hollow feeling gnawed at me. I couldn't ignore it any longer. That afternoon, I took a step I had been putting off for weeks. I confronted Marcus. As he sat at the kitchen table, Scrolling through his phone, I stood in the doorway, holding the crumpled lease in my hands like a confession. The weight of the paper seemed unbearable. He looked up when I didn't move, his eyes lighting up with that warm, familiar smile. "You all right?" he asked, concern flickering briefly. I didn't respond. I held the lease out to him instead. His face drained of color, and his eyes darted quickly over the words. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice tight. "I went to the apartment," I said quietly. "I saw you there with her." "What's going on, Marcus?" For a long moment he didn't speak, his gaze flickering between the paper and my face. And then he sighed deeply. "Clara, it's not what you think." "I don't want to hear it," I said, my voice trembling. I saw you with her. Clara, please." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the coldness between us growing sharper. "I can't believe you would do this to me." My chest ached, and the words felt like they were being ripped from my soul. "How long, Marcus? How long has it been going on?" He swallowed hard, the weight of the truth bearing down on him. "Finally," he whispered. "It's been a few months." My heart shattered in that moment, the finality of his words cutting through me. "I never meant to hurt you," he added, his voice breaking. "But Lena, she's different. I never expected it to go this far." I didn't say anything else after that. The silence was suffocating. He sat there waiting for me to process, but I couldn't. My mind was a tornado of thoughts, emotions, and broken pieces of what I thought was our life. How could he? How could they? Later that night, I packed a bag. I couldn't stay there, not in that house where every room held a memory of him, of us. I drove aimlessly, finding myself on the outskirts of town, at the small coffee shop we used to visit on Sundays. I sat there, watching the rain fall against the window, wondering where to go next. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't go home. I stayed at my sister's apartment, trying to collect myself. My phone buzzed endlessly with messages from Marcus, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. I didn't want to hear the excuses, the apologies. I needed time, but the reality of the situation kept creeping in, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. Lena, the apartment, the lease. She wasn't just some fling, some mistake. Marcus had been building a life with her while I was in the dark, playing the part of a faithful wife. It made me sick to my stomach. And then, on the third day, something unexpected happened. I got a message from Lena Monroe. "Clara, we need to talk. It's time you knew the whole truth." The weeks after I spoke with Lena were a blur of pain and clarity. I moved back into the house, though it no longer felt like mine. Every corner of the place was tainted with the shadow of their betrayal. I didn't speak to Marcus unless I had to. He was a ghost in our home, always there, but never really present. When I tried to go through the motions of our old life, making dinner, cleaning up, it felt like I was playing a part in a scene that wasn't mine to act in anymore. He tried too. He tried to apologize, but the words came out hollow, like they didn't belong to him anymore, and I couldn't bring myself to believe him. One morning, I sat across from him at the kitchen table, the silence stretching between us. His hands were wrapped around his coffee mug, but I couldn't focus on anything but the distance between us. "Clara," he began, his voice shaking. "I love you. I never stopped loving you." But I wasn't sure I could believe him anymore. I wasn't sure I could trust myself to see the truth. One afternoon, I went through the old photo albums. I needed to remember who I was before all of this, before Marcus and Lena. I found photos from our early years together, smiles at parties, trips to the beach, our wedding day. I stared at them for what felt like hours, trying to recall the version of myself who could trust and believe in love so completely. That woman seemed so distant now, like a different person. When I looked up from the albums, I saw Marcus Reed, 36, standing in the doorway, watching me. His face was unreadable, and for the first time in months, I didn't know what to say. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "But I'm asking for it anyway." I closed the album, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The question I had been avoiding, the question of whether I could forgive him, whether I could ever trust him again, hung in the air, heavy and unbearable. I spent days pacing between our old life and the empty spaces that Marcus had left behind. I went to work, kept up appearances, and tried to fill the void with anything that could distract me from the unbearable weight of the decision I had to make. But nothing worked. The only person who could answer my questions, the only person who could make me feel whole again, was him. I started asking myself the hard questions. Did I love him still? Was I just holding on to a version of him that no longer existed? Could love survive betrayal? One evening, I found myself in the place I had avoided for weeks. The empty apartment Marcus Reed, 36, and Lena Monroe, 29, had shared. I stood at the door, the lease still crumpled in my bag, and realized I had come here to confront the truth. Not just about them, but about myself. What was I willing to accept? The door opened, and Lena Monroe, 29, stepped into the hallway, her eyes wide with surprise. She looked different. Her shoulders were tense, and her hair was loosely pulled back. I had no idea what I was about to say to her, but I knew it had to be said. "Lena," I began, my voice unexpectedly steady. "I came here because I need you to know something. Everything that's happened. It's not just about Marcus. It's about me, too." She looked at me, her lips parting as if to say something, but she didn't. She just nodded, as though she understood. "I don't know what I want from you. I don't know if I can forgive you or him," I continued. "But I can't move forward unless I know what happened. Not just what he told me. What happened between the two of you?" Lena took a deep breath, and for the first time I saw her vulnerability. The woman who had once seemed so confident, so sure of herself, now appeared as lost as I was. "I never meant for it to happen, Clara," she said softly, her voice almost breaking. "But it did, and I don't expect your forgiveness. I just wanted you to hear it from me." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of holding on to something that was already gone. The conversation with Lena was hard, but it brought me some measure of clarity. As I walked out of the apartment, I realized that I had been holding on to the past for far too long. I had built my identity around a love that was no longer there. It was time to let go. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why Marcus did what he did, or if I can ever trust him again. But I do know this: I can't continue to punish myself for someone else's choices. It's time to move on. I left the apartment building behind me and walked toward the future, the only thing I could be sure of anymore. My future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. Months passed. The pain began to fade, not because I had forgotten, but because I had learned to live with it. Each day, the weight of the past seemed to lift a little more. My mornings were spent with coffee and the company of old friends, and my evenings were mine again. No more waiting for apologies. No more lingering in the shadows of someone else's mistakes. I moved into a new apartment, a small space with high ceilings and sunlight streaming through the windows. I filled it with plants, books, and photographs of places I wanted to go. Not places I had been with him, but places that were entirely mine. This space was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly free. But even as I grew into this new chapter, Marcus lingered in the edges of my thoughts, like a ghost I couldn't quite shake. One evening, while I was out at a local bar with a few friends, I ran into someone I hadn't expected: Lena Monroe, 29. She stood across the room, talking to some strangers, laughing as if everything in her world had fallen into place. For a moment, I debated leaving, avoiding the confrontation that I felt was inevitable. But instead, I made my way over to her. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "Clara," she said quietly, her eyes searching mine. "I didn't expect to see you here." I smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. Funny how that happens. She looked at me carefully. "I just want you to know, I never meant for any of this to happen. I hope you're doing okay." And for the first time I saw her, not as the woman who tore apart my life, but as someone who was hurting too. Maybe not in the same way, but still, she had her own scars. "I'm doing okay," I said, my voice steady. Better than I thought I would, actually. There was a long silence before I added, "I'm moving forward, Lena, and I hope you do too." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I hope you find everything you're looking for." And just like that, we both walked away, no more words necessary. In the weeks that followed, I finally made peace with everything. Marcus Reed, 36, had reached out a few times, apologizing, but I didn't respond. It wasn't about punishing him anymore. It was about protecting my own heart. I had to let go, not just of him, but of the version of myself that had been defined by him. I spent more time traveling, seeing the world beyond the walls I had once confined myself to. I went to places I had always wanted to visit, without hesitation, without the fear of being left behind. Each step felt like reclaiming parts of me I had forgotten, but still, the questions lingered. Did I regret it all? Did I wish I could have saved my marriage? Sometimes I found myself wondering if Marcus ever thought about me the way I thought about him. But these thoughts were fleeting. They didn't have the power over me they once did. I was learning, slowly but surely, that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant accepting that the past was behind me, and that I was deserving of a future I could build on my own terms. One day, months later, I was sitting at a cafe, reading a book, when a familiar voice interrupted my peace. "Clara?" I looked up, and there he was, Marcus Reed, 36. His face was older, perhaps even a little more tired, but the warmth in his eyes was unmistakable. He looked nervous, standing at a distance, waiting for me to invite him in. But I didn't know what to say. "Marcus," I finally said, my voice even. "It's been a while?" He nodded, looking sheepish. "I know. I wanted to give you space. But I've been thinking a lot, and I don't know how to make up for what I did. I don't expect anything from you, but I needed you to know I'm sorry." I studied him for a long moment. There was no anger in my chest anymore, just a quiet, almost sad understanding. "I'm sorry too," I said softly. "I never thought I could forgive you. But I think I've finally reached the point where I don't need to anymore." He looked at me, his expression a mix of relief and sadness. "I understand, and I'll always be grateful for what we had." We shared a brief, awkward silence before he finally stood. "I'll let you go," and I watched as he walked away, knowing that whatever happened next, I was okay. In the end, I realized that I didn't need closure from him. I had already closed that chapter on my own. The next day, I took a walk along the river, letting the quiet of the city wash over me. It was the first time in months that I didn't feel the weight of the past on my shoulders. I could breathe again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known existed. 6 months later, life had quieted into a rhythm I could finally call my own. The wounds had faded into scars, visible, but no longer painful to touch. I had a new job at a small design firm downtown, one that filled my days with purpose instead of emptiness. Every morning I walked through the city with a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. There was something liberating about being alone, about knowing that every choice I made now belonged solely to me. Still, there were moments when I'd catch my reflection in a shop window and think of the woman I used to be. The one who trusted too easily, loved too blindly. I didn't hate her anymore. She had done her best with what she knew, but now I knew better. I wasn't rebuilding the old version of myself. I was creating someone new. Someone stronger. My new apartment overlooked the park, and on weekends, I'd sit by the window with coffee, sketching scenes from the street below. Couples walking dogs, children chasing pigeons, a violinist playing near the fountain. Life kept moving, indifferent to heartbreak or healing. I found comfort in that. One Saturday afternoon, I saw a familiar figure across the park. Lena Monroe, 29. She was sitting on a bench, reading a book, her hair shorter now, her posture relaxed. She didn't see me, but I watched her for a long moment. There was no anger left in me, no bitterness, just a quiet recognition that we were both survivors of the same storm, though it had wrecked us in different ways. I smiled to myself, closed my sketchbook, and whispered under my breath, "We're both still standing." It was on an ordinary Tuesday that I ran into Marcus Reed, 36, again. This time, by chance, or maybe fate's final test. We both reached for the same book in a small, used bookstore. When I looked up, our eyes met, and time froze for a second. "Clara," he said softly, almost reverently, as though afraid to break the moment. "Marcus," I replied, calm but curious. He smiled faintly. "You look happy." I nodded. "I am." There wasn't much more to say. We both knew that whatever connection we had once shared had dissolved into something gentler, something almost nostalgic. The kind of affection that doesn't hurt anymore. We stood there, surrounded by shelves of forgotten stories, and for the first time, I realized ours was one of them. That evening, I sat at my desk, rereading old letters I'd written but never sent. Confessions, apologies, memories. I tore them all into tiny pieces, feeding them one by one into the fireplace. As the paper curled into ash, I felt the last remnants of that chapter burn away. There was a strange comfort in knowing that I didn't need to be defined by what had happened. Love had broken me. Yes, but it had also remade me. I wasn't naive anymore, but I wasn't bitter either. I had learned how to love differently, beginning with myself. Outside, the city glowed with life. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to join it again. Weeks later, I attended an art show downtown. My sketches, my story, my recovery, captured in lines and color. People walked through the gallery, pausing in front of my drawing. One titled Alder Street showed a woman watching from a car on a rainy night, the night everything had changed. As I stood there, watching strangers interpret my pain as art, I felt an overwhelming peace. It wasn't about Marcus anymore, or Lena, or what I'd lost. It was about what I'd created from it. A woman beside me whispered, "Whoever drew this must have survived something." I smiled, turning to her. She did. It was a brisk autumn evening when I stepped out onto my balcony, a warm cup of tea in my hands, the city buzzing below me. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a soft glow over the scene. Life had shifted, irrevocably and completely, and in its place I had built something new. Something unrecognizable from the woman I once was. But that was okay. I had learned that transformation didn't always need to be painful. Sometimes, it was simply the quiet result of surviving, of continuing to move forward, even when everything seemed lost. I had my apartment, my job, my friends. I had rediscovered the joys of being alone, of being me again, without the shadow of another's expectations looming over me. Yet, for all that I had gained, I knew there were parts of me still untended, waiting for a new kind of connection. Perhaps one that wouldn't break me. Perhaps one that would build me up instead. The first time I saw him, I wasn't looking for him at all. I was at the local bookstore again, lost in the aisles of old novels and new releases, when I heard a voice behind me. Clara! I turned, startled, and found myself face to face with Aaron Wells, 36. A man I had met once a year earlier at a mutual friend's party. He was tall, with dark hair and a gentle smile, and there was something effortlessly kind about him. The kind of kindness you rarely see in a world full of distractions. "Hey," I said, blinking in surprise. "Aaron, right?" "That's me," he grinned, adjusting the book in his hands. "I didn't think I'd run into you here." "I'm a regular," I said with a soft laugh, my heart racing slightly. We stood there for a beat, an unspoken understanding passing between us. Aaron didn't know the story of my past. He didn't need to. He was a stranger, and yet somehow, that was exactly what I needed. "I'd love to catch up if you're free," he said, his voice warm but casual, like we were simply two people meeting under ordinary circumstances. It had been so long since someone had asked me that, since someone had treated me like just me, not the broken, betrayed version of myself, but the woman I had become. "Sure," I smiled. "I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, Aaron and I spent more time together. Coffee dates, long walks in the park, quiet dinners. There was no rush, no expectation. We shared stories, laughed over ridiculous things, and slowly, I began to feel something shift inside me. Something I hadn't expected: trust. It was small at first, fleeting, like a whisper that wasn't sure whether it belonged. But as I got to know him, I realized that this was different. He didn't ask me to be someone I wasn't. He didn't expect me to forget the past. Instead, he respected it. And that, more than anything else, was what made me open up again. One evening, after a quiet dinner, we walked down the street, the crisp autumn air swirling around us. "Do you ever wonder if life is just about making new mistakes?" Aaron asked, his tone light but thoughtful. "I don't know," I said, taking a deep breath. "I think maybe it's about making new choices." He stopped walking for a moment and turned to face me, his hands in his pockets. "And what if those choices lead to something better?" I smiled, feeling the weight of the question settle into my chest. "Then maybe we're doing okay." One night, after we'd spent hours talking about everything and nothing, Aaron turned to me, his face serious but tender. "I know I don't know all of your story, Clara," he said softly, "but I can tell you've been through a lot. I don't want to rush you into anything, but I think I need to be honest with you. I care about you." His words hung in the air between us, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I didn't feel like running away or hiding behind walls of armor. I didn't feel scared. "I care about you too," I said quietly, meeting his gaze. And in that moment, I realized that the pain of the past no longer held me back. It had shaped me, yes, but it had also given me the strength to recognize what real love looked like. This was not the love I had once known, but a different kind. One that didn't demand, didn't betray. A love that could build instead of break. Aaron smiled, and I did too. By the time winter arrived, things had changed. We were no longer two strangers navigating life in parallel. We were partners, companions in the truest sense. I didn't need to be whole before I met him. I had already begun to rebuild. He simply helped me see that I wasn't alone in the process. One snowy evening, Aaron asked me to join him for dinner at his place. I agreed, feeling the comforting pull of his quiet presence. But as I entered his apartment, I was greeted with a surprise. A small, intimate gathering of friends and family. "Surprise," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I wanted to celebrate us, this new beginning." And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and warmth, I realized something important. I wasn't waiting for life to start again. I had already started it, on my own terms, in my own way. I had found love again, not because I was looking for it, but because I had allowed myself to heal and grow. And in that growth, I found someone who cared, who was willing to walk beside. It was a crisp spring morning when I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city that had seen so many versions of me. The days had grown longer, the air lighter, and with each passing breeze, I could feel the weight of the years lifting, years of questioning, of heartbreak, of rebuilding. I was standing at the edge of something new, but it didn't feel like the edge of a cliff. It felt like the beginning of a horizon, a place where I could step forward with no fear of falling, but with a calm certainty that no matter where I went, I was capable of standing tall. There was a part of me that would always carry the scars of what had happened with Marcus, but those scars no longer felt like wounds. They felt like memories, lessons that I had learned in order to move forward. They were part of me, but they didn't define me anymore. I wasn't the woman who had been torn apart. I was the woman who had rebuilt herself from the fragments. One weekend, Aaron and I took a spontaneous trip to the coast. The salty air, the sound of the waves crashing, and the feeling of sand beneath my feet. It was a kind of peace I hadn't known I was missing. We spent hours walking along the shore, talking about everything and nothing. At one point, Aaron turned to me with a grin. "You know," he said, "I never would have guessed how much I'd love a beach walk with someone like you." I laughed, watching the horizon stretch out before us. "Someone like me?" "Yeah. Someone who knows how to make every moment feel special," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "Someone who's been through a lot and still knows how to find joy in the little things." I paused, letting his words sink in. "I guess I've learned that joy isn't about forgetting the past. It's about accepting it and moving forward anyway." He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm glad you're moving forward with me." In that moment, I realized that the journey I had taken, the lessons I had learned, had led me here. To this person, this moment. And no matter what came next, I had already found something real. Back home, things continued to grow between Aaron and me, but at a pace that felt natural. There were no rushes, no unrealistic expectations, just two people who had both lived through enough to know that good things take time. I no longer needed to prove that I was capable of love or of moving on. I simply was. And that was enough. But as life settled into this new chapter, an old question began to nag at the back of my mind. What was I waiting for? I had been waiting for an apology from Marcus, waiting for closure, waiting for a sign that everything I had gone through had a purpose. But now, standing in the life I had created, I realized that waiting no longer served me. I had already built everything I needed. The final piece wasn't forgiveness from others. It was forgiveness of myself. One evening, as I was getting ready for dinner with Aaron, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to check for imperfections. I didn't feel the weight of old scars or past mistakes. I simply saw myself, someone who had been through pain, yes, but had come out the other side stronger and more certain of who she was. I smiled at my reflection, feeling a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with self-acceptance. When Aaron arrived, he smiled at me with an expression that said everything I needed to hear. I was no longer the woman he had to fix. I was the woman he wanted to share life with. We didn't need words to explain the depth of our connection. It was enough to be here, together, living in the present and not the past. As we walked out the door, hand in hand, I realized that I was finally whole. And it wasn't because of anyone else, but because I had learned to embrace all of who I was. Every version of myself, every scar, every triumph. As the months passed, we moved in together. It wasn't the dramatic decision I had once imagined. It was just the next step in a journey that felt right. There were no grand gestures, no life-changing revelations. Just two people living life together, supporting each other through whatever came their way.